The sound of gunfire shattered the early morning calm as Helena Parker burst through the doors of the Primrose Inn, her chestnut hair flying wildly behind her, eyes wide with terror. It was 1878 in Lincoln, Nebraska, and she had just made the biggest mistake of her life, or perhaps the wisest decision, by refusing Randall Blackburn's marriage proposal. "He's coming," she gasped, clutching the reception desk for support. "Please, I need somewhere to hide." Martha, the innkeeper's wife, took one look at Helena's torn sleeve and the bruise forming on her cheek and ushered her toward the back staircase. "Third door on the left, dear. Lock it behind you." Helena had barely reached the landing when the inn's front doors crashed open again. Randall Blackburn stood in the doorway, 6 feet of fury and wounded pride, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "Where is she?" His voice carried up the stairwell, sending ice through Helena's veins. "I don't know who you're talking about, Mr. Blackburn," Martha replied coolly. "Don't lie to me, woman. Helena Parker. I know she came this way." Helena pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering in her chest. At 23, she was the daughter of a prosperous merchant who had died the previous winter, leaving her with a modest inheritance. Randall, the town's bank manager at 32, had been pursuing her relentlessly, convinced her father's small fortune and her beauty would make a fine addition to his possessions. Last night at the town social, he had cornered her behind the church, a ring in one hand and a threat in his eyes. "Your father owed me money, Helena. Either you marry me, or I'll take your house instead." She had refused, and his charming facade had shattered like glass. From her hiding spot, Helena heard Martha's firm voice. "I suggest you leave, Mr. Blackburn. Sheriff Miller won't take kindly to you threatening decent folk." "The sheriff and I understand each other perfectly," Randall replied, his voice dripping with smug assurance. "I'll be back, and when I find her, she'll regret her decision." The sound of his spurs faded, but Helena knew better than to feel relief. Randall Blackburn was not a man who gave up easily. 3 hours later, Helena sat in the kitchen of the inn, a cup of tea cooling between her trembling hands. Martha had provided her with a clean dress and a sympathetic ear, but little in the way of solutions. "You need to leave Lincoln," Martha said gently. "Blackburn has the mayor and half the businessmen in his pocket. It won't be safe for you here." "Where would I go?" Helena asked, despair threatening to overwhelm her. "I have some money, but no family, no friends outside of town." The back door opened and both women startled. Martha relaxed when she recognized her husband, Thomas, accompanied by a tall stranger. "This is Matthew Sullivan," Thomas said. "Best wrangler in 3 counties, and heading to Colorado tomorrow with a herd. He might be able to help." Matthew Sullivan removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair and eyes the color of weathered leather. His face was tanned from years under the open sky, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than not. At 28, he had the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. "Madam," he nodded to Helena, "Thomas tells me you're in some trouble." Helena glanced uncertainly at Martha, who nodded encouragingly. "Randall Blackburn wants to marry me. I refused him, and now he's—" Helena swallowed hard. "He's threatened to take everything from me. My home, my reputation. Maybe worse." Matthew's expression darkened. "I've heard of Blackburn. Man like that doesn't take no for an answer. He's looking for her all over town," Thomas added. "It's only a matter of time before he checks here more thoroughly." Matthew considered this, his eyes never leaving Helena's face. "My crew is driving 500 head to Denver. We leave at dawn." "It's hard traveling and no place for a lady, but I'll do it," Helena interrupted. "I can ride and I'm stronger than I look." A smile flickered across Matthew's face. "I don't doubt it, Miss Parker, but Blackburn will be looking for a woman traveling alone or with strangers. We need a better story. Martha snapped her fingers. You could be married. A newlywed couple heading west to start a new life. Who would question that? Helena's cheeks flushed. But we're not. I couldn't possibly, just for appearance's sake, Matthew clarified quickly. I give you my word as a gentleman, your virtue is safe with me. But it would explain your presence with the drive and give you my name's protection. Helena looked at the cowboy, trying to gauge his character in the lines of his face. His eyes were kind, his manner respectful. And she was running out of options. How soon can we leave? She asked. First light, Matthew replied. Can you be ready? Helena thought of the home she'd have to abandon, the life she'd built in Lincoln. Then she thought of Randall Blackburn's cold eyes and grasping hands. Yes, she said firmly. I'll be ready. Dawn broke cold and clear over the prairie as Helena slipped out the back door of the Primrose Inn. She wore a simple traveling dress Martha had altered for her overnight, and carried a small carpetbag with her most precious possessions, her mother's locket, a daguerreotype of her parents, and the remainder of her inheritance sewn into the lining of her cloak. Matthew waited with 2 horses, a sturdy bay gelding for himself, and a gentle dun mare for her. The rest of the crew is meeting us at the crossing, he explained, helping her mount. From there, it's open country all the way to Colorado territory. They rode in silence through the sleeping town, keeping to back streets and alleys. As they passed her family home for the last time, Helena felt a pang of loss, but no regret. Freedom was worth the sacrifice. At the crossing, they met the rest of Matthew's crew, 5 weathered cowboys and a chuck wagon driven by an older man with a wild gray beard. Boys, this is Mrs. Sullivan, Matthew announced, the lie falling easily from his lips. My wife will be joining us on the drive to Denver. Helena held her breath, waiting for questions or objections, but the men merely tipped their hats with murmured greetings. The oldest among them, who introduced himself as Hank, gave her a toothless smile. About time this boy found himself a woman, he cackled. Welcome to the family, Mrs. Sullivan. The first day on the trail was harder than Helena had imagined. Though she could ride well enough, the endless hours in the saddle left her muscles screaming. The dust from 500 cattle filled her lungs and coated her skin, and the spring sun beat down mercilessly. But she didn't complain. Each mile put more distance between her and Randall Blackburn, and for that alone, she would have endured far worse. That night, as the crew settled around the campfire, Matthew approached with a tin plate of beans and salt pork. It's not what you're used to, he apologized, but it's hot. Helena accepted the food gratefully. Thank you for everything. Matthew sat beside her, his own plate balanced on his knee. No need for thanks. No decent man could leave a woman in trouble. Still, you're risking a lot. If Blackburn discovers you helped me. Let me worry about Blackburn. Matthew's voice hardened. Men like that, who think women are property to be claimed, they need to be taught a lesson. There was something in his tone that made Helena look at him more closely. You sound like you speak from experience. Matthew stared into the fire, his expression distant. My sister. She married a man who seemed respectable. By the time we learned otherwise, it was too late. He fell silent for a moment. She's gone now. Helena placed her hand gently on his arm. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago, he said, though the pain in his eyes suggested otherwise. But I swore then that I'd never stand by while a woman suffered at the hands of such a man. They sat in companionable silence as the fire crackled and the night deepened around them. For the first time in days, Helena felt something close to peace. The peace was shattered 3 days later when one of the cowboys, a young man named Ethan, rode hard into camp with alarming news. There's 3 riders following our trail, he reported to Matthew. One of them matches the description of that banker you mentioned. They're about half a day behind us." Helena felt the blood drain from her face. "How? How did he find us?" "Lincoln's not that big," Matthew said grimly. "Someone must have seen us leave together." He turned to his crew. "We need to move faster." But pushing 500 cattle too hard risked stampedes, exhaustion, and loss. Despite their best efforts, the gap between them and their pursuers narrowed with each passing day. On the sixth night, as they made camp near a small creek, Matthew took Helena aside. "We can't outrun them with the herd," he said quietly. "You and I need to break away, travel light and fast." Helena looked at the cattle, the chuck wagon, the men who had accepted her without question. "But your livelihood, Hank can get the herd to Denver," Matthew assured her. "I trust him with my life." "Why are you doing this?" Helena whispered. "You barely know me." Matthew's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, something warm and unexpected. "I know enough," he said simply. They left before midnight, riding northeast instead of west, hoping to throw off pursuit. Matthew led them through narrow canyons and across shallow streams, every step calculated to hide their trail. For 3 days, they rode hard, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses. They slept in shifts, one always keeping watch while the other caught a few hours of fitful sleep. On the 4th day, they reached a small settlement, little more than a trading post and a handful of cabins clustered around a stagecoach stop. "We'll rest here tonight," Matthew decided. "Get a proper meal and information about the trail ahead." The trading post doubled as a modest inn with 3 rooms for travelers. The proprietor, a sturdy woman named Mrs. Quinn, looked them over with shrewd eyes. "We have 1 room available," she announced, "for you and your wife." Helena opened her mouth to correct her, but Matthew squeezed her hand gently in warning. "That's perfect, thank you," he said, passing over the necessary coins. The room was small but clean, with a single bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the dusty Main Street. "You take the bed," Matthew said immediately. "I'll sleep on the floor." "Don't be ridiculous," Helena protested. "You've been riding as long as I have. We can share the bed." At his raised eyebrow, she blushed. "I trust you, Matthew." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or gratitude. "I'll try to deserve that trust, Miss Parker." "Helena," she corrected softly. "After all we've been through, I think you should call me Helena." After washing away the worst of the trail dust and enjoying a hot meal in the trading post's small dining room, they returned to their room. The awkwardness Helena had expected didn't materialize as they settled into bed, back to back, a respectful space between them. "You think we've lost them?" she asked into the darkness. "For now," Matthew replied, his voice a low rumble, "but Blackburn strikes me as a man who doesn't give up easily." "No," Helena agreed, a shiver running through her. "He doesn't." She felt Matthew shift slightly. "Try to sleep, Helena. I won't let anything happen to you." Strangely, she believed him. Despite the danger, despite knowing Randall was hunting her, Helena fell asleep feeling safer than she had in years. Morning brought the sound of horses and men's voices. Matthew was instantly alert, moving to the window with the silent grace of a predator. "3 riders," he reported tersely. "One of them matches your description of Blackburn." Helena's heart leapt into her throat. "How did they find us?" "Doesn't matter now. Get dressed quickly. We're leaving." They slipped out through the back of the inn, but they had barely reached the small stable when a shout went up. "There she is." Helena turned to see Randall Blackburn striding toward them, flanked by 2 hired guns. His face was twisted with rage and triumph. "Did you really think you could run from me, Helena?" he called. "Your father's debt doesn't simply disappear because you decide to play the harlot with some cowboy." Matthew stepped in front of her, his hand hovering near his holstered pistol. The lady isn't interested in your proposal, Blackburn. I suggest you turn around and ride back to Nebraska." Randall's laugh was ugly. "The lady? Is that what you call her? Do you know she's promised to me that she's legally bound by her father's agreements?" "That's a lie," Helena cried. "My father would never. Your father signed over a promissory note," Randall sneered. "In the event of his death, either the debt would be paid or your hand would secure it. It's all perfectly legal." Matthew's expression didn't change, but Helena felt him tense. "Show me this document." "It's with my lawyer in Lincoln," Randall replied smoothly. "But I assure you it exists. Now step aside, cowboy. Helena is coming home with me." "No," Helena said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Randall. Whatever agreement you claim to have, I never consented to it." Randall's face darkened. "You ungrateful little—" He reached for his gun. What happened next unfolded in heartbeats. Matthew drew and fired in one fluid motion, the bullet striking Randall's shoulder. The banker stumbled back with a cry of pain. His hired guns reached for their weapons, but Matthew's second and third shots sent them diving for cover. "Run!" Matthew grabbed Helena's hand, pulling her toward the horses. They mounted in seconds and galloped away from the settlement, the sound of pursuit close behind them. Matthew led them into rougher country, where the dense pine forest provided cover, and the uneven terrain made tracking difficult. By nightfall they had lost their pursuers, but Helena's nerves were stretched to breaking. When they finally stopped to make camp in a sheltered ravine, she collapsed against a boulder, trembling with exhaustion and delayed fear. "He won't stop," she whispered. "Not ever." Matthew knelt beside her, his face grave in the gathering dusk. "I won't let him hurt you, Helena, I promise you that." "How can you promise such a thing? You saw him, he believes he owns me." "No man owns you," Matthew said fiercely. "Not Blackburn, not your father, not me. You belong to yourself." Helena looked up at him, this man who had risked everything for a woman he barely knew. In that moment, something shifted between them, something profound and inevitable. "Why did you really help me, Matthew?" she asked softly. "The truth." He was silent for so long that Helena thought he might not answer. Then he sat beside her, their shoulders almost touching. "When Thomas told me about you, something called to me," he said carefully. "I can't explain it better than that. I just knew I had to help you." He paused. "And then I met you and I understood." "Understood what?" Matthew turned to her, his eyes reflecting the first stars appearing overhead. "That some things are worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary." Helena's breath caught. Without conscious thought, she leaned toward him, and Matthew met her halfway, his lips finding hers in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. When they parted, Helena rested her forehead against his. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Me too," Matthew confessed, and somehow that made her feel braver. They traveled for 2 more days, making their way toward Colorado by a circuitous route. The land grew wilder, the settlements fewer and farther between. But Helena no longer felt like a fugitive. With Matthew beside her, she began to imagine a future uncertain, perhaps, but her own to shape. On the 3rd day, they crested a ridge and saw a small frontier town nestled in the valley below. "Willow Creek," Matthew said. "Not much to look at, but the people are good. I helped the sheriff there once with a cattle rustling problem. He owes me a favor." Helena studied the distant cluster of buildings. "Do you think we'll be safe there?" "For a while," Matthew nodded. "Long enough to figure out our next move." As they approached the town, Helena noticed Matthew growing increasingly tense, his eyes scanning their surroundings with heightened vigilance. "What is it?" she asked. "Probably nothing," he replied, though his expression said otherwise. "But Blackburn strikes me as the sort who plans ahead. If I were him, I'd have telegraphed ahead to towns along likely routes." Looking for a single woman traveling with a cowboy, Helena realized. Matthew nodded. So we stick to our story. We're Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, headed to Denver to start a new life. They rode into Willow Creek at midday, the main street bustling with the typical activity of a frontier town. Several people called greetings to Matthew, confirming his earlier visit. At the sheriff's office, they found a solidly built man with a graying mustache and shrewd eyes. He recognized Matthew immediately. "Sullivan, didn't expect to see you again so soon." His gaze shifted to Helena, curiosity evident. "Sheriff Miller, this is my wife, Helena," Matthew said smoothly. "We're on our way to Denver, but we've run into some trouble." The sheriff's office grew quiet as Matthew explained their situation, omitting certain details, but making it clear that Helena was being pursued by a dangerous man with a false claim. "Blackburn," Sheriff Miller mused. "Can't say I know him personally, but his type is common enough. Men who think money and influence put them above the law." He stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "You're welcome to stay in Willow Creek as long as you need. I'll keep an eye out for strangers asking questions." Relief washed through Helena. "Thank you, Sheriff." "Don't thank me yet," Miller cautioned. "If this Blackburn is as determined as you say, he won't give up easily." They found lodging at the Willow Creek Hotel, a modest two-story building with clean rooms and a small dining room. The proprietress, Mrs. Donnelly, a widow with a practical manner, showed them to a corner room on the second floor. "Breakfast is served from 6 to 8, she informed them. "Dinner at 6 in the evening. Mind the kerosene lamp, the glass chimney is new, but the base leaks if you're not careful." When they were alone, Helena sank onto the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by everything that had happened. "What now?" she asked. Matthew sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "We rest, gather information. See if we can find out more about this supposed agreement between your father and Blackburn. And if it's real, then we'll deal with it," Matthew said firmly. "But first, we need allies." Over the next few days, they settled into a cautious routine in Willow Creek. Matthew found work at the livery stable, his skill with horses immediately evident and appreciated. Helena, not wanting to remain idle, offered to help Mrs. Donnelly with the hotel's accounts, having learned bookkeeping from her father. In the evenings, they would walk through town together, getting to know the community and allowing themselves to be known in return. To Helena's surprise, the pretense of marriage began to feel less like a deception and more like a preview of what could be. A week after their arrival, Matthew returned from the livery with a troubled expression. "What is it?" Helena asked, setting aside the ledger she'd been working on. "Two men arrived on the afternoon stage," he said quietly, "asking questions about a young woman traveling with a cowboy." Helena's heart sank. "Blackburn's men, most likely. Sheriff Miller is keeping an eye on them, but we should be careful." That night, as they lay side by side in the darkness, Helena turned to face Matthew. "I'm tired of running," she whispered. "Tired of looking over my shoulder, waiting for him to find us." Matthew propped himself up on one elbow. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe it's time to stand and fight, to face Blackburn once and for all. It's dangerous, Helena. The man is obsessed with you." "Exactly. He won't stop until he has me or until he can't pursue me anymore." Matthew was silent for a long moment, his face shadowed in the moonlight filtering through the window. "I might have an idea," he said finally, "but it's risky and I'll need to speak with Sheriff Miller first." The next morning they met with the sheriff in his office, the door locked and the shades drawn. Matthew outlined his plan while Helena listened with growing hope and trepidation. "It could work," Sheriff Miller said slowly when Matthew finished. "But timing is everything, and Blackburn would need to believe he has the upper hand." "He's arrogant," Helena added. He always underestimates others, especially women. Then we use that against him, Matthew nodded. But first, I need to send some telegrams. Over the next 3 days, Matthew and Sheriff Miller laid their trap. Helena played her part, appearing in town each day, seemingly unaware of the danger. The two strangers watched her movements, and on the third day, one of them disappeared, presumably to report her location to Blackburn. "He'll come himself," Helena predicted as they prepared for bed that night. "He won't trust anyone else to handle this." "That's what we're counting on," Matthew agreed. He hesitated, then took her hands in his. "Helena, before tomorrow, there's something I need to tell you." Her heart quickened at his serious tone. "What is it?" "These past weeks with you, they've been the most important of my life. When this is over, if we succeed." He paused, searching for words. "I don't want our marriage to be just a convenient story anymore." Helena's breath caught. "Matthew." "I'm in love with you," he said simply. "I think I have been since the moment you climbed onto that horse in Lincoln, ready to face whatever came next." Tears welled in Helena's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "I was so afraid to admit it with everything so uncertain." Matthew pulled her gently into his arms, his kiss a promise that stilled her fears, if only for that moment. Morning dawned clear and cool, the town of Willow Creek awakening to its usual rhythms. Helena dressed with particular care in a blue calico dress that had been a gift from Mrs. Donnelly, her hair arranged neatly beneath a modest bonnet. "Ready?" Matthew asked, buckling on his gun belt. Helena nodded, though her stomach churned with anxiety. "As I'll ever be." They separated at the hotel door, each heading to their assigned position. Helena walked slowly toward the general store, aware of being watched but pretending oblivion. Inside, she exchanged pleasantries with the shopkeeper and began examining bolts of fabric, positioning herself near the large front window as planned. She didn't have to wait long. A commotion outside drew her attention, and there was Randall Blackburn, dismounting from his horse in the center of the street. His left arm was in a sling, the result of Matthew's bullet, but his bearing was as arrogant as ever. With him were 4 men, hired guns by the look of them, all heavily armed. Blackburn spoke to them briefly, then turned toward the general store. Helena's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to remain calm. The bell above the door jangled as Blackburn entered, his eyes fixing on her with triumphant malice. "Helena," he said, his voice carrying in the suddenly silent store. "You've led me on quite a chase." She straightened her shoulders, meeting his gaze directly. "Hello, Randall. I see your shoulder is healing." His expression hardened. "No thanks to your cowboy friend. Where is he?" "Abandoned you already." "Matthew would never abandon me," Helena replied with quiet confidence. "Unlike some men, he understands that women aren't property to be claimed." Blackburn's face flushed with anger. "You still don't understand your situation, do you? I have a legally binding agreement with your father. You belong to me, Helena." "I'd like to see this agreement," she challenged. To her surprise, Blackburn reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. "I brought it with me this time. See for yourself." Helena accepted the paper with steady hands, unfolding it carefully. It appeared to be a loan agreement between her father and Blackburn, with a clause stating that in the event of default, the debt could be satisfied through marriage between Blackburn and Helena. "This is your proof?" she asked, unable to keep the contempt from her voice. "A contract to which I was never a party, in which I'm treated as collateral." "It's legal," Blackburn insisted. "Your father signed it." "My father would never have agreed to this," Helena said firmly, studying the signature more closely. "And this isn't his handwriting." Blackburn's expression flickered for just an instant, but it was enough. "It doesn't matter. You're coming with me now." He reached for her arm, but Helena stepped back, raising her voice. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Randall. Not today, not ever." "You don't have a choice," he snarled, grabbing her wrist. "Your cowboy isn't here to protect you this time." "Actually, he is." Matthew's voice cut through the tension like a knife. He stood in the doorway of the general store, his stance relaxed but his eyes hard as flint. Blackburn spun around, releasing Helena. "Sullivan, I should have known you'd show your face eventually." "Let her go, Blackburn," Matthew said evenly. "Your claim on her is based on a forged document. That's fraud, and Sheriff Miller would be very interested in discussing it with you." For the first time, uncertainty crossed Blackburn's face. "It's my word against yours, and I'm a respected businessman while you're just a drifter." "Is that so?" The new voice belonged to Sheriff Miller, who had appeared behind Matthew, accompanied by 2 deputies. "Because I've received some interesting telegrams about you, Mr. Blackburn. Seems the Banking Commission in Nebraska has questions about your business practices." Blackburn's confidence visibly wavered. "This is absurd. I've done nothing wrong." "Then you won't mind coming to my office to discuss these allegations," Sheriff Miller replied, "along with the matter of pursuing Miss Parker across state lines with intent to harm." "Intent to," Blackburn spluttered. "She's my fiancée." "No, Randall, I'm not," Helena said firmly. "I never was. And now everyone can see the lengths you'll go to possess something that was never yours." Blackburn's face contorted with rage. With shocking speed, he reached for the pistol concealed in his sling. Matthew moved faster. His gun cleared its holster in a blur, the shot echoing deafeningly in the confined space of the store. Blackburn staggered backward, clutching his chest, disbelief written across his features as he collapsed to the floor. For a moment, no one moved. Then Sheriff Miller stepped forward, kneeling beside the fallen banker. "He's dead," he announced after a brief examination. Helena stared at Blackburn's still form, feeling not triumph or relief, but a profound sadness for a life so consumed by greed and entitlement. Matthew holstered his weapon and moved to her side, his arm encircling her protectively. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. She nodded, leaning into his strength. "It's over," she whispered. "It's finally over." The aftermath unfolded with surprising swiftness. Sheriff Miller's investigation confirmed that Blackburn's document was indeed a forgery, a desperate attempt to gain control of Helena's inheritance. Matthew's actions were ruled justifiable self-defense, as multiple witnesses testified that Blackburn had drawn first. Blackburn's hired men, faced with their employer's death and the prospect of charges, quickly dispersed. One, seeking leniency, revealed that Blackburn had been embezzling from his own bank for years, a revelation that would have shattered his reputation had he lived. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Helena and Matthew stood on the porch of a small cabin on the outskirts of Willow Creek. Sheriff Miller had arranged for them to use it while they decided their next steps. "What do you think?" Matthew asked, his arm around her waist as they looked out at the rolling landscape. "It's beautiful," Helena replied honestly. "Peaceful. It could be ours," he said. "The owner's looking to sell. It's not much, but with some work." Helena turned to him, searching his face. "Are you suggesting we stay in Willow Creek?" "I'm suggesting we make a home," Matthew clarified. "Whether it's here or somewhere else, that's up to you. But I meant what I said before, Helena. I love you and I want to build a life with you. A real life, not just a story we tell others." Helena's heart swelled with emotion. 6 weeks ago she had been trapped, facing a future not of her own choosing. Now, standing beside this man who had risked everything for her, she felt truly free for the first time. "Ask me properly, Matthew Sullivan," she said, her eyes shining. Understanding dawned in his expression. Slowly, he lowered himself to one knee, taking her hands in his. "Helena Parker, will you marry me? Not because you need protection, not because of any document or obligation, but because you choose to, because we choose each other." "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, with all my heart." Their wedding took place on a brilliant autumn day, with the aspen trees turning gold against the blue Colorado sky. The entire town of Willow Creek seemed to attend, along with Hank and the cattle crew, who had successfully delivered their herd to Denver and ridden back to stand with Matthew. Helena wore a simple ivory dress made by Mrs. Donnelly and carried wildflowers gathered that morning. But her most beautiful adornment was her smile as she walked toward Matthew, who waited for her with wonder and love written plainly on his face. Sheriff Miller performed the ceremony, his gruff voice softening as he pronounced them husband and wife. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder," he declared, and Helena felt the rightness of those words deep in her soul. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and more goodwill than Helena had experienced in years. As the evening deepened, she and Matthew slipped away to their cabin, now furnished with wedding gifts from their new friends and neighbors. "Mrs. Sullivan," Matthew murmured as he carried her across the threshold. "How does it feel to use that name in truth?" "Like coming home," Helena replied, drawing his lips down to hers. Later, as they lay entwined in the quiet darkness, Helena traced the contours of Matthew's face with gentle fingers. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That 6 weeks ago I was running for my life," she said softly. "And now I have a life worth living because of you." Matthew caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "We saved each other, Helena, and we'll keep doing so every day." "Is that a promise, Cowboy?" she teased. "It's a vow," he replied solemnly, "and I intend to keep it." Spring came to Willow Creek, bringing with it new beginnings. The small cabin had been transformed through their combined efforts, Matthew's skilled hands and Helena's eye for beauty, creating a true home from the humble structure. A vegetable garden flourished behind the house, and chickens clucked contentedly in a newly built coop. But the most significant change was the swell of Helena's belly beneath her apron as she stood on the porch, watching Matthew return from town. "Any news?" she called as he dismounted. "Just that the Johnsons' mare finally foaled," he replied, climbing the steps to kiss her soundly. His hand rested protectively over their unborn child. "How are my treasures today?" "Active," Helena laughed. "Your son has been kicking all morning." "Daughter," Matthew corrected with a grin. It had become a playful argument between them, though in truth, neither cared about the baby's gender, only that it would be born healthy and loved. That evening, as they sat together on the porch swing Matthew had built, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, Helena felt a contentment so complete it brought tears to her eyes. "What is it?" Matthew asked, noticing her emotion. "I was just thinking about how close I came to missing all of this," she confessed. "If you hadn't been at the inn that day in Lincoln, if I'd been too afraid to leave." Matthew pulled her closer. "But you weren't afraid. That's what I saw in you from the beginning, Helena. Courage. The strength to defy what others told you your life should be." She rested her head on his shoulder. "We've come so far." Indeed they had. In the year since they had settled in Willow Creek, both had flourished. Matthew had partnered with the livery owner and was now half owner of the business. Helena had started teaching at the small schoolhouse 3 days a week, sharing her love of books and learning with the town's children. They had built not just a home but a community around them, something neither had fully experienced before. Sunday dinners with friends, barn raisings for newcomers, holiday celebrations that filled their cabin with laughter and warmth. The nightmare of Randall Blackburn had faded to a distant memory. Summer brought their child into the world, a healthy boy they named James Thomas Sullivan, after both their fathers. Helena recovered quickly from the birth, her natural strength reasserting itself as she adapted to motherhood with the same determination she had shown in all challenges. Matthew proved to be a devoted father, endlessly patient and tender with their son. Helena would often find them together in the rocking chair, Matthew telling the baby stories of cattle drives and open skies, promises of adventures to come when he was older. By the time James was walking, Helena was carrying their second child. Life had settled into a rhythm of work and love and family that sustained them through all seasons. On James's third birthday, as friends gathered to celebrate, and the newest Sullivan little Mary Helena slept peacefully in her cradle, Sheriff Miller pulled Matthew aside. "Got something for you," he said, handing over an envelope. "Came with the mail from back east." Matthew opened it curiously, his expression turning serious as he read the contents. Helena, noticing his withdrawal from the festivities, came to his side. "What is it?" she asked. He handed her the letter wordlessly. It was from a law firm in Lincoln, informing them that, with Blackburn's fraudulent activities now fully documented, Helena's father's property had been cleared of all claims. As his sole heir, she was entitled to the proceeds from its sale, along with compensation from Blackburn's estate for his criminal attempts to defraud her. "It's a considerable sum," Matthew observed quietly. "Enough to move back east if you wanted. Give the children advantages Willow Creek can't offer." Helena studied her husband's face, reading the uncertainty there, the momentary fear that she might choose a different life now that the option existed. She looked around at their home, at their friends laughing and talking, at James playing with the wooden horse Matthew had carved for him. Then she deliberately tore the letter in half. "Helena," Matthew exclaimed. "What are you doing, making a choice?" she said firmly. "The same choice I've been making every day since we met. This is our home, Matthew. These are our people. I don't want any other life than the one we've built together." The relief in his eyes was swiftly followed by love so intense it took her breath away. "Are you certain?" "More certain than I've ever been of anything," she assured him. Then she smiled mischievously. "Though I wouldn't say no to a new dress for the harvest dance." Matthew laughed, pulling her into his arms. "I think we can manage that." As the years passed, the Sullivans' cabin expanded to accommodate their growing family. James was joined by Mary, then by twin boys, Michael and Henry, who arrived with twice the energy and mischief of their siblings combined. Helena's small classroom grew into a proper schoolhouse, with a bell tower and multiple rooms. Matthew's livery business thrived as Willow Creek developed into a respectable town, with a railroad connection and a steady stream of new settlers. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Matthew surprised Helena with a gift she had never expected: the deed to her father's old store in Lincoln, which he had quietly purchased through an agent. "I thought we might visit next summer," he suggested, as she stared at the document in astonishment. "Show the children where you came from. Maybe even set up a branch of our business there, if you'd like." Tears filled Helena's eyes as she realized what he was offering: not a return to her past, but a reclaiming of it on her own terms, with him by her side. "I'd like that very much," she said softly. That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Helena reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a desperate flight across the prairie to this life of abundance and love, it seemed almost miraculous. "What are you thinking about?" Matthew asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "About how being hunted led me to being found," she replied. "How running away brought me home." Matthew smiled in the darkness. "I've never told you this, but but I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you in that kitchen, ready to risk everything for your freedom. And I fell in love with you when you said you'd protect me, and I somehow knew you meant it," Helena confessed. "When the whole world felt dangerous, you made me feel safe." "I always will," he promised, drawing her closer. Outside their window, the vast Colorado sky spread out like a blanket of stars, endless and bright. But Helena knew that the true vastness, the true brightness, was the life they had created together, a love born in danger but flourishing in peace, a journey that had only just begun. As she drifted toward sleep in her husband's arms, Helena Sullivan knew with absolute certainty that no matter what challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, just as they had from that first desperate day in Lincoln. Not as pursuer and pursued, but as partners, equals. A love story written across the wild frontier of their shared life. And in that knowledge, she found a peace more profound than any she had ever known.